Now, in golf, a 72 is considered not that great. It's about par, you're doing okay. But in politics, for the Lib Dems, 72 MPs last week is an amazing achievement. And we are going to go through what this means, what results shocked us on the night, what does it mean for all the parties going forward. And just another slight tidbit, we have now more MPs called Sarah than the Greens have MPs at all. Welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. So we're back a week after the incredible election results, which we know you'll have all picked up on, but it's so exciting. I'm joined by David MacMenzie and Martin Boffey to kind of go through the actual results and what it's going to mean going forward. We might get joined by Hannah Kitchen. Her power's just gone off at home. So if we randomly see a dark square appearing on your screen, it's because Hannah's finally tuned in from darkest Yorkshire. But we'll go straight to David to start off with. I mean, David, the results were just incredible. We're all kind of processing it over this last week, but what was your experience on the day when the exit poll came out and those results started to come in?
Yeah, look, I think unbelievable result. I don't think anybody really predicted the scale and level of the comeback. I have to say, I think that shows a tremendous value in terms of having a clear plan about how we were going to go after this election, but also the ability for, as much as people like Rory Stewart may not like it, Ed Davies' plan to get his brand and get out there and get coverage. It all worked and it all contributed towards what is simply an astounding result. I mean, even at the heights of Nick Clegg, Charles Kennedy, we did not achieve this level of seats. This is a real opportunity now to build and move forward, and I'm excited to see what comes next.
Martin, now congratulations firstly to you, because you have basically gone, and for listeners that don't know, and I think Martin will clarify my maths, that basically Horsham, where Martin is the council leader, you've basically gone from a handful of councillors in 2018 to running a council and now having the MP. Life's easy
Yeah,
for you in Horsham, isn't it,
it's
Martin?
pretty.
No dramas either way.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, really. I mean, actually, if you go back to just before the 2019 election, we had the council elections. We had four district councillors, two county councillors. That was it. Now we've got 27 district councillors. We control the district council, three county councillors, and an MP in that time. So, yeah, pretty amazing. But the day itself was fantastic. But I think the feel I got on the day, actually, out and about and at polling stations and stuff, there seemed to be kind of this quiet determination of people. You could just feel it as you went around. Was like everyone was coming out saying, right, we're going to do this, and nothing's going to put us off, nothing's going to stop us. We're on a mission as the general public, and we're going to do this. And then, yeah, well, the count itself was my first general election count, so that was quite an experience. But yeah, amazing day. Unfortunately for us, it ended up being quite a very long night because we didn't declare until 6 in the morning. But
Likewise.
there you go.
Yeah, but I suppose we should just say this because obviously it's a great night. Lib Dems made history, but actually to all those people that we know, were friends with, some of them didn't get the results they wanted, either didn't win on the day, didn't keep their deposits, thought they might do better. These elections are always tough. And for everyone who stood, wherever you came, just thank you so much for what you did, because actually, getting 3.5 million votes, all those 5,000 votes you got, all those 2,000 votes you got, all add up to that total, and it all helps the party, with more money, but also establishing ourselves in different. Because what this election's also showed is, if you compare them up to 2019 and beyond, just where Lib Dems have won compared to where we didn't is incredible. The movement we've made forward. Now, where were you guys when the exit poll came out? Because I decided at the count because we were unlikely to win either of our local seats. So we decided to have a little gathering at our house because we had a local election by-election. We thought, well, we'll have an hour before we're even allowed into the count. Let's all get together and see this moment of history happening. And it was amazing. And believe it or not, one of our councillors actually bet on getting 70 plus seats. And he told me about this for ages. And I went, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I put 42. And even then, everyone was telling me I was the most optimistic from anyone out of ALDC about numbers. I can't believe he won his bet. Unbelievable. But yeah, your thoughts, Martin, as that exit poll came out.
Well, I was kind of, as I said, I was at the count, so we were literally in the hallway waiting to go into the sports hall to do the count, and I was the only one seemed to be switched on to the fact the exit poll was about to come out. So there I was with my laptop and put it on. So I was just focused really, but I was excited about the numbers projected, but it ended up being better than that. But as I say, we were really kind of in the zone for the count.
And because our count didn't let us into 11, but obviously the exit poll wasn't entirely correct. I mean, particularly it overemphasized Reform's vote. I think the original exit poll might have said 14. Yeah, that's right. And actually only got 4 or 5. Beg your pardon.
5.
So it was but I mean the exit poll still was an excellent moment in terms of just because they're so accurate generally, David. And I suppose from the exit poll, did you believe it? Were you going to go all Paddy Ashdown and say I'll eat my hat if that's right?
Well, I have so much faith now in the work that they've now done with exit polls to make sure that it's as accurate as it possibly can be, that I thought this could be a really, really good result. Now, it could maybe be slightly less than that. It could be slightly more than that, but generally tends to be pretty pinpoint as to almost where it's going to land. So when it came out, I was at home. I had my little girl, baby girl, laying on my chest while the exit poll came out, trying not to wake her up. I nearly did wake her up when obviously I was like, "Whoa, this is big." But yeah, it's we've obviously had John Curtis on this podcast before, and I was pretty confident about the numbers that came through. And as you say, it actually turned out to be better than what was forecast as well.
What was the actual number? Was it 62 or 61 originally on the exit?
I think it was 10 short of what it turned out to be. So it was about 62, either 61 or 62. The interesting thing is obviously now John Curtis has kind of talked about how actually, as much as we dislike first past the post, we actually were very good at gamifying that system to make sure that we maximise the number of seats we got, versus maybe the overall number of votes that we got nationally, compared to, if you look at, as you said, Reform got 5 MPs, but actually got, quite a high number of votes nationally. That just shows that, as I say, that the strategy was pretty pinpoint about these are the seats we want to go after. This is why we're going after them, and this is how we're putting the effort into those seats to win them.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit later on about the other parties and Reform in particular, because I have seen quite a bit of commentary saying, "Oh, why are you talking about Reform so much to the media?" But actually, how Labour and the Tories deal with Reform is actually a really important issue in the next 5 years. Yes, the Independents and the Greens Greens took votes off Labour and the Tories, but I think they will have less of an impact on the direction, the shift that happens within the two big parties than what Reform did, because both of them are going to have to figure out how they get that vote back. Because Reform candidate in Ribble Valley got 8,000 votes, not a leaflet, not appearance at a hustings. So there's that core vote there will decide who wins Ribble Valley in 5 years and what happens to that. So it is a really important point. We'll touch on that later. I also want to talk we're going to talk about a little bit of our particular results we want to highlight. And I'll go first with one that I was obviously up in Cumbria. Tim Farron absolutely destroying that vote, given his constituency got cut in 2 and he had to work a whole new section in a really awkward, huge geographical area. Incredible result. Well done to the Westmoreland team for getting that side. But I just want to raise a lovely point on North Shropshire, because Helen Morgan, I was really sure that our by-election victories were going to struggle this time. And not only did Helen Morgan win, she won by an absolute canter with a local party that isn't massive. But she's been so good as an MP. I was genuinely delighted that she got over the line. And I also, before you come in, Martin, just want to say a huge congratulations to our 4 Lib Dem podcast contributors who did get over the line: Lisa Smart, Tom Morrison, Josh Babarindi, and then the last one to come through was Alison Bennett on our team WhatsApp. And obviously we were sharing it, Tom at his speech and Lisa at his speech, and I didn't want to text Alison, how's it going, in case it hadn't happened, and I was absolutely terrified. But Alison Bennett got in mid Sussex as well. But what seats would you like to highlight, Martin?
Well, I'll come back to the obvious one in a minute, but Stratford-upon-Avon was a pretty exciting one to think. We've taken the home of Shakespeare, Maidenhead, obviously taking Theresa May's old seat, but it's obviously, I'm going to unashamedly say, it's got to be Horsham for me, and the reason I will say that there's a reason partly why I'm saying this, because our result didn't come out until 6 o'clock in the morning. It's kind of felt like nobody outside cared or noticed, and I'll illustrate for you why this is important. I have a little obscurity here. This is the parliamentary history of Horsham, 1295 to 1885.
I've got the same thing.
Yeah. And in this list at the back here, it says February 29th, 1876, James Clifton Brown, Esquire. Why am I saying that? Because that's the last time a Liberal or even a non-Tory held Horsham. 1880. Now, if that result had come out at 2 in the morning, it would have been everywhere. But because it was late, nobody noticed. But it's just what a massive achievement it is to have overturned, that degree of history and a 20,000 majority and all the rest from what is an incredibly small local party by target standards.
Yeah. David, what were your highlights of that? Obviously, you can talk as well about the SNP going backwards. Is one of the huge stories of the thing is how much they absolutely collapsed.
Yeah, so there's 2 seats I'd like to highlight off the top of my head. First of all, I just want to send a congratulations to the team at Wokingham, who Clive won the seat. Long story short, I'd actually gone for selection in Wokingham, but Clive is a lovely guy who obviously won selection there, and the team was fantastic. Guys like Adrian Bettridge and other people down there. I'm so delighted for them because they deserve it. And actually, John Redwood didn't even have the gumption to stand against Clive because he knew he was going to get an absolute hiding, and they pulled it off. So big congrats to the guys down there in Wokingham, and was delighted to see that come through. But the one for me that's the big one that really summed this up for me and was the last one to declare was Angus MacDonald taking back Charles Kennedy's old seat up in Inverness in West Rossshire, knocking out Drew Hendry, who didn't even turn up for the declaration, although he said he had something else he had to attend, but I don't know if that's true or not. And to me, given what the likes of Ian Blackford did up there when Charles lost that seat, I just think that is a fantastic result, and I'm glad to see it switch back. And there's other ones I could call it as well. Susan Murray taking back, which was Eastern Bartonshire, but it's now Mid Dunbartonshire. I think I've got that right. Yeah. In fairness, obviously Amy Callaghan, who was the MP for the SNP, had been very unwell. So there's things, obviously, you don't want to do a Nicola Sturgeon and be going like this, when the result came through. But it was nice to see that come back to the fold as well. So there's a lot of fantastic results, probably too many to go through. There's a lot of new names that I'll need to get familiar with, that I'm sure we'll all need to know at some point. But hey, we're on track and big things.
I think
I should just jump in, John, and say, if I could, that obviously I've mentioned the seat twice, but I haven't mentioned the man who won it yet, and that's John Milne is the new MP for Horsham, and it's amazing actually he's such a great community representative, and actually he's a triple-hatted councillor. So he's as we stand today at the moment, he's now got 4 hats because he's a member of parliament, a county councillor, a district councillor, and a neighbourhood councillor. It's non-statutory, but yeah, that's who we just sent to parliament.
A man after my own
legend.
Yeah. I will say, on the Charles Kennedy thing, weird enough, I put a post up because it took, I can't remember when I actually did it. I think it was like the Saturday morning, maybe, or maybe even Friday. By Friday night, we kind of half knew the result because the SNP had said we've lost it. And I posted it with a picture of Charles Kennedy saying, "This one's for you, Charles, 72," and that it got 900 odd likes and things like that, miles above. There's that kind of love and affection for Charles, and I think partly by the time the result had come in, the emotional exhaustion and like realization of what had happened had come in, and loads of people were feeling really emotional about it. One of my counsellors who's Scottish, she just said she just broke in tears. That was it. That was just like the dam that burst. But talking about some of the seats you've mentioned about Maidenhead, about Wokingham, it is interesting because these were some of the big beasts, and Surrey Heath as well, where the existing Tories didn't stand, whether that's Michael Gove, Theresa May, etc. And I do wonder how many of them would have been kept if the Tories hadn't lost shit loads. But I suppose what they didn't want is to be what Liz Truss was. And I don't know if any of you saw the Liz Truss. I watched it live. I had I don't know, I can't remember if we put it on our WhatsApp, but she didn't seem to know what was happening. It was so strange. She looked completely blank.
Wasn't that her premiership, John, as well?
It was. But it was just extraordinary what happened to that Tory vote. And the fact we won so many seats. I mean, so how we're going to do that going forward is going to be a really important thing, because one of the things we should also acknowledge is that because targeting and tactical voting had played such a role in this election, we only had far more seats where we lost deposits because our votes squeezed to virtually nothing. Again, quite a few up here in Lancashire where deposits were lost. Now, the party's going to have to figure out how they can do about that, because some of these local parties are tiny, and £500 is a lot of money to those local parties. So that will have to be figured out. But also, I suppose, Martin, where do we go from here? We've got 72 seats to defend, which in itself is a huge task. We have only 27 second places. So the key bit for the Lib Dems, because we want to grow, we want this not to be our summit, we want to be a launching pad for even better things. So where do the Lib Dems go from here?
Well, I mean, nationally, in the way that most people pay attention to, I suppose that is a challenge in terms of those second places and where do we go to. I think, holding what we have is, I don't want to be a glass half empty guy, but that's going to be a challenge in and of itself, because I think we're in a national situation where it's very uncertain as to what's going to happen on the basis of this reform surge. I think what are the Conservatives going to do? What direction are they going to take is going to massively influence the field for us. But if I think about what I'm thinking locally, because as good campaigner types, I'm immediately thinking about our county council elections next May, and I think, and I think
for the listeners there, I'm holding up our county council canvas cards ready to go up here in Preston.
But I mean, I've been looking back at strangely, because I'm a bit Scottish, but back at the 2013 results down here, back when UKIP was strong, looking at it's not a like for like indicator, but like where is Reform going to give Conservatives problems in West Sussex, and thinking, we've got to think about where we can take advantage of this and try and move forward rather than losing ground on our next set of local elections. And I think the Conservatives, if they spend, we'll talk about them in a minute, I guess, but if they're going to spend 6 months having a fight with each other, Reform aren't going to do that. they're going to be getting ready for local elections and start trying to take a big lump out of them as well. So there's just a lot of uncertainty about what the environment is we're operating in at the moment.
I suppose, David, the county elections next year are going to be a really good indication because all of them, all the county seats are Conservative controlled. Now, and all these little players, all this kind of war gaming we're doing in terms of what's going. So, what happens to Reform? Do they actually have enough capacity to actually get candidates? What happens to Labour? Because also there's a really interesting dynamic with Lib Dems and Labour here, because we'll see a lot of the county council areas that we want to build and progress in now have lots of Labour MPs in as well. So how do Labour capitalise on having MPs structured? Are they able to capitalise? And are Lib Dems going to be scuppered from the get? I mean, if you would look at this a general election result and thought, okay, what can the Lib Dems do in the 2025 county elections? You'd think we're in a great place to make significant gains. But all these things we're talking about, the first test them is the counties. And for me, I can do the Preston version. So my county seat now is an entirely Labour MP area.
Yeah.
But Labour are massively third. And then all the areas we've basically wiped out the Tories in North Preston we're still Tories are going to be the main challengers, but we have a Labour MP for all of them now. So how are we going to use that dynamic? So David, there's so many moving parts to figure out for campaigning and just for figuring out where the country's going to go, David.
Yeah, I mean, I would always kind of preface that national picture is not always necessarily transferable to local.
Yep.
So you can see very substantially confusing results that come out when you get to local elections. People will vote for somebody on, a local perspective that they may not necessarily vote with from a national perspective, or vice versa. What I would say is, I think there's a lot of things that have to play out for the rest of this year that will probably give us a good indication of what happens next year. So, as it stands at this point in time, if the Tories descend into massive infighting, then essentially the Lib Dems become the real main opposition in Parliament at present. Now, there are a number of things that I think we can really hold the Labour government to account on, but also things that, frankly, and I think Ed Davey's been pretty open about this, we're more than happy to work with them on if there's things that they would like to steal from our manifesto or things they would like to build on. But that is obviously a good message to take into local elections around. These are the things that our MPs have been able to deliver, and if you give us that mandate from a local perspective, think what we could do at that level as well. And essentially as well, with the Tories, parties that are infighting and having a conversation amongst themselves about ideology never perform well, and that will probably be an area where we can capitalise on if their vote collapses, because there's really no coherent message about what that party plans to stand for. But it just depends on kind of how that goes. I mean, that does lead us into another conversation about what happens now with the Tories, what happens with Reform. Is Reform actually going to try and push into Labour areas? People forget that Reform, I think it's over about 120 seats now. They are the main challenger to Labour Party, and Nigel Farage was very upfront in saying that we're coming after your votes, Labour, as opposed to pinpointing the Tories. So, I think there's a real dynamic of who do the Tories choose as their next leader. If it's Suella Braverman, I think they've got serious problems. But then I'm not too sure who out of the sort of supposed field. I don't think Kemi Badenoch would be right for them.
She's leading at the moment, isn't she? So they did the first poll of Con Home supporters or whatever, and Kemi Badenoch is 36%. She was far ahead of Cleverly, Tugendhat, and things like that. But obviously, just so listeners know, the Tory party first, the MPs get to decide the top two before it goes to the membership. So, David, for me, I don't see any way our moderate's going to win that vote unless the MPs stitch it up so it's a Tugendhat versus Cleverly or something like that. But
well, don't forget that most of the MPs that are left in the Conservative group is actually more from the moderate wing than is from the sort of far right wing. A lot of the sort of ERG group have gone now. Your John Redwoods, these people, they're not there.
Yeah.
So, if they're smart, I think they would have to lean into getting somebody that is sensible, centre ground, that can maybe give them a little bit of a resurgence in terms of the vote. If they go on this wild ideological push into the right, I think it's further down trajectory for them.
Yeah.
And you know, there's an interesting dynamic, just very quickly, if you humour me. There's a lot of people, you know, you see speculation in the media about there's certain factions in the Conservatives that would like to do some kind of a deal with reform. You know, there's been a lot of talk about what happened in Canada in 1993, and then the sort of Unite the Right movement that came in sort of 2003, which weirdly, you know, that was the Reform Party, and then it became was it Canadian Alliance or something like that, and then it became what is now the Conservative Party of Canada. You know, my view is actually, I think there's another example in the Commonwealth that would be more applicable to this, which is if you look at Australia. You know, Australia has, and I put it in inverted commas, the Liberals. They're not the Liberals, they're the Conservatives. But they have a national coalition, a formal national coalition with the National Party, which is a kind of more right-wing, rural constituency-based version of Conservative politics. And essentially it allows both parties to run on their own platform, their own, you know, branding without having a formal party together. But they always go into formal coalition with one another. And if I was a campaign manager and they were switching towards a Suella Braverman and she wanted to do something like that, you know, I think she might even go, I'll give Nigel Farage and his party a free run at the seats where they've come second.
Yeah. What about you, Martin? Where do you see the Tory reform right kind of axis going over the next 5 years or so?
Well, I'm not as I think David's got a better idea than I have about, because I was thinking, well, who is the Conservative Parliamentary Party now? What's left? How do they break down? I just think they've got big decisions, and there's no obvious solutions for them at the moment, because every decision they could possibly take has consequences. Like if they give the membership two right-wing candidates to choose between, well, if they give them one moderate and one right-wing, right-wing's going to win. If they give them two right-wing candidates, you know, then what does that say to the moderates in the party? And you know, then basically the parliamentary party is just ceding the fact that, well, we're going to end up with a leader that we don't really like. If they try and stitch it up and give them two moderates to choose between, where does their membership go? You know, then they decide, well, are we basically declaring outright civil war against our own party membership? You know, I think just actually holding some kind of coalition together for the Conservatives is incredibly challenging at the moment. And
we have to think about, I mean, I've always had this rule that membership is always more extreme than its MPs. Yeah, really. The membership, obviously, the Tory membership did pick Liz Truss. Yeah. It is a part of human nature that you tend to double down on your mistake before you realise you're on the wrong path. And I think, a bit like how Labour went from Miliband to Corbyn, I actually think the Tories, there'll be a significant chunk of that membership that will just think we weren't right-wing enough. You know, our policies were great on Rwanda or whatever else and stop the boats, but we just didn't implement them properly. Brexit was great, but we didn't implement it properly. And I have a feeling the Tory membership will double down on that mistake. And there's quite a few Tory members and councillors locally who are on that moderate side. And I don't know how they survive in that party. Because that is the people that hated Boris Johnson. They thought it was, you know, that... or the membership that I spoke to on the doors when we won so well in May, where they said I'd been a member and an activist, but this isn't the Tory party I was part of. I think the Tory party is at a really existential problem, and I think if they get it wrong, they really could be out of power for a while. But that said, that's a useful pivot for us to go to Labour, because I actually think we'll talk about how Keir Starmer's done in his first week, but what Labour will be really wary of, and David's alluded to it with Reform and Nigel Farage saying we're going to go after Labour now, is that just like Boris Johnson, they have a very wide coalition of people that voted for them this time, but it's a very shallow coalition. There's lots of people who... I mean, we saw some of the polling. The biggest reason people didn't vote Tory was they wanted to get the Tories out rather than they were particularly enamoured by the Lib Dems or Labour or anything else. So for Keir Starmer to survive, where they have seats down in Cornwall and red wall seats up in the Midlands and the Northeast and Northwest, how they get that balance right, given the economic situation they've got, is going to be really tough, David. And I don't know, and we'll have to wait and see how Labour manage that, and where Labour pivot is probably as interesting as where the Tories go.
Yeah, I think essentially for the Labour Party, I think they've got really, actually, I was going to say one term in office, but they've actually probably got shorter than that. They've got about 2 years to get the public on side that we are making real inroads into the challenges that you were seeing under the previous government. I think, in fairness, if we want to talk about what Keir's done in his first week, I will give credit where I think there are some things that they've done that have been pretty interesting. I mean, I think with bringing Timpson in as the prisons minister, that guy has a genuine ambition to try and reform the penal system and obviously how we rehabilitate prisoners. And I think that is a really interesting conversation to have about, right? We cannot just lock people up, en masse. We do have to think about how do we rehabilitate people back into society and be a contributing member to society, right? So credit where credit's due, they are going down that line. I think there is an interesting piece there where they're looking at kind of in a similar way to what Gordon Brown did about how do we pull people in that have, sort of a government of all, of all capabilities, etc. Where they are like. The other interesting thing is they have had a number of MPs that have come back that were previously MPs that do have experience of being in government. So unlike, I guess, where we have a massive influx of new members who have to get used to what it's like being a member of Parliament first, they have people that have immediately come back into the cabinet, yes, in junior positions, but they will know how to very quickly get results done and work with the civil servants to try and make inroads. So I think they see it as, we have to be upfront and honest with where the country is, but also we need to try and map out how we make gains that we can point to that say, look, we are making inroads. But, the first thing they did was say, there's hardly any money left. The prison system's an absolute nightmare. We are being left with a big challenge here. But if you notice, Keir is really leaning into that service. We're here to serve. We're here to try and turn this around. And in some ways, I kind of feel like there's a bit of a, when Rachel Reeves said there's no money left, I think that was obviously pointing back to what the Tories did with the Liam Byrne note, oh, sorry, old boy, there's no more money. They're looking at saying, right, we're going to put the boot in that nobody's going to bring you back in a one term sort of thing. But that's the problem now. I think the general public is, compared to, say, even 10 years ago, there's a lot less tribalism from the general voter. They will move their vote if things don't move, and very quickly. So that's why I think they have to have an eye on how do we really turn this around as much as we can in a one term.
And I suppose, Martin, when we look back, it's been an incredibly active first week for the new Labour government. I think part of that is because we've heard rumours that actually Starmer didn't want to have a summer recess, but his MP said, look, we are completely knackered. And, we've been preparing for a snap election since Christmas, and actually we do need that break. So they've gone full gun straight away. But also, that is probably the part where Sue Gray has actually played a part in it, because not only did they have Sue Gray in place in order to get this transition smoothly from the optics, having stuff ready to go, but also they knew they were going to win. So if you knew you were going to win, you don't have to, oh crap, we're suddenly the Prime Minister. They knew about from several months out that we were probably going to be the government, and so they could go straight into it. But what your impressions of how Labour has begun and where they may go, Martin?
Well, I mean, I think I remember amazingly back to 97 when Labour took over, and they really did hit the ground straight with the big announcement back then was like 2 days later they made the Bank of England independent. So we haven't had anything quite on that scale, but then they had a surging economy at the time, so it could do these things. I think that they've got the recess. I think it's shorter than it normally is. I think it's going to be about a month rather than whatever, but it's probably wise. Some of the things they're doing, having been through a council level change of control last year, I think it's classic change of control stuff, which is basically, right, find everything that's wrong straight away and get it out in the first 100 days so that everybody knows that that was the previous lot's fault, because that's about as long as you're going to get to find stuff, because if you find it any later than that, it's your fault. So there's going to be a certain amount of that going on. But I've also think, and I think it's showing up so far as well, you can feel it. There was a lot of, before the election, people saying, well, everyone wants the Tories out, but there's no enthusiasm for Labour, and how are they going to do anything different? And people will get fed up with them very quickly. I think what that doesn't take into account, and I think, having Sue Gray on board is going to help with this a lot, is just how much a difference it can make with a change of government, particularly with your civil service or officers in our point of view, is, it's a breath of fresh air to them. They're not got people coming in who are just constantly vilifying them personally and trying to ruin their lives anymore, and just demoralizing them and wear them down. Just by having a different vibe and atmosphere and state of intention for the government machine to operate, I think we can be surprised about just how much better it will function just as a result of a change of mood and change of morale. So in some ways it doesn't surprise me too much, and I think that will continue for a little while yet.
And I suppose what we haven't factored into this is just how incompetent the Tories were.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing, because I try and think of what did the Tories actually get done in the last, basically since the Liz Truss mini budget. I can't really think of too many dramatic things that they've actually got on with and got done with. And you're right, the Labour Party they're at their pinnacle right now. You're never as powerful as when you first start, and it's all a big decline since. So, and actually, in a way, we should commend them. Actually, if you're going to do things, even though David's talked about the prison system, what Labour needs to do, we can't just, prisons don't solve crime. That's the important thing. And so, but there's a right-wing narrative that's perpetrated through society forever, is that the way to deal with crime is more guards, more walls, bigger prisons, is kind of that thing. And actually, the only time you can maybe do that, where the right-wing press don't have any influence over it, is right at the start. Get this shit out and done right at the start. And actually, I hope they do, because I think whatever happens, we're obviously Lib Dems. We want Lib Dems to do well going forward. But actually, I want a country that runs better. I want trains that run better. I want houses better insulated. I want water companies properly dealt with. And if the Labour Party can do some of that in power, then I'm going to be delighted with that. I genuinely am. But like I say, we will see what happens with Labour going forward. Now, I suppose one of the other things that Labour also has to contend with is actually what happens on its left. Now, so we did have Jeremy Corbyn win, which I thought was an extraordinary. I did not think Jeremy Corbyn would get over the line there. And then you had the Greens. We thought they might win in Bristol Central, having taken the council and built up there. Keeping Brighton will be a disappointment for the Labour Party, having they took the council off the Greens in a recent local election. But one of the big things I'm worried about will be the alienation of the Muslim vote that they've happened. Losing places like Blackburn was a big loss for them. In Preston, where we are, they lost 22% of their vote. An independent pro-Gaza, for the lack of a better phrase, kind of candidate swept up thousands upon thousands of their voters. And how Labour deal with that, Martin, I'll come to you first, is going to be really interesting. Or do you think they'll ignore it? You think, actually, what's the point in having a huge majority? You can afford to lose those places, because in Preston they lost thousands of votes but still won.
I don't know how they're going to deal with it, but I suspect they'll probably be thinking, well, we're not necessarily going to worry about it just yet. Is it going to fade? Can we deal with some of these issues by delivering well as a government, and see how it goes on? And I think there's a lot of the question about, are they going to be more left-wing than they campaigned on? They're already under quite a bit of pressure on the 2-child benefit cap and things like that. Some of the seats they didn't keep, I can sort of see, basically they were sort of victims of their own success a little bit, though, in places like Bristol and Brighton, because everybody knew they were going to win, so it was safe to vote Green
Yeah.
basically.
That's an interesting. That's a good, really good point. Actually, how many
Um,
people thought, well, I can vote whoever I want because I know I'm going to get a Labour government. And actually,
yeah,
to be honest, I played up to that in my campaign.
yeah,
I said, Keir Starmer's going to be your MP, but you can vote Lib Dem quite comfortably here.
yeah. So I used to think, when we used to see all these big projections of these ridiculous majorities that they might get of 250 and stuff like that, I thought, well, oh, they'll have so many that they'll be able to form their own opposition that'll be that would still be the biggest party in the second party. I think, but I think there's no tonic like victory for actually holding them together at least for a while. And I think, strangely enough, I think there's more of a risk of Conservatives splitting. I know we're talking about Labour at the moment, but I must just throw in one quote I saw this morning from on the BBC, I think, an unattributed from a Conservative saying, the answer we need to find is to appeal to voters we lost to all parties. I don't know how you do that on policy, but Keir Starmer showed you can do it by looking competent and serious. But I don't know if any of the candidates we have at the moment can do that.
Yeah, I mean, because Labour didn't really have much of a policy platform in the campaign,
No.
David. They will kind of keep stum, and hopefully the Tories will implode, which they did, and hopefully the SNP implode, which they did. But Labour are going to have to get that identity in. Otherwise, that, like I've said, the wide but shallow coalition of voters they got this time will crumble very quickly. But how do you imagine Labour are going to deal with that? Or will they or do you think they'll coast through because the majority is so big?
Like, the strategy was the Ming Vaz strategy of, just hold very steady and this thing's not going to break, right? And it really, if the Conservatives couldn't have had a worse election campaign, then, D-Day, I think, was a huge problem for them. But look, in terms of, I still think I hold back to what I said about it's a coalition of voters that if you don't deliver very quickly, you could be in a real problem situation. I think what Martin said is absolutely right. I mean, you look at areas like Bristol, where the Greens obviously made gains. Don't remember, it's not that long ago that we were very strong in Bristol, and that's kind of gone away. But and everybody I think knows my background of previously being in the Labour Party. When I lived in Reading, I ran in a seat for the Labour Party that was held by the Greens, and the view that I got was that the Labour Party just kind of went, well, it's gone now, we're not going to get it back. These things are a drip and tap. If you don't deal with it quickly, then it gets worse, right? And actually, they've now taken all the 3 seats in that ward, and they've taken all the 3 seats in the next ward. If they have a Green MP now in Bristol who does a good job and is a very good advocate, then it's very highly likely that they could make gains in other parts of Bristol. So they need to get a grip on what do we do next? What do we do for areas like this where we can really deliver back for the community and showcase that actually you'd be better off being inside the government than outside the government. But I do think there are kind of a couple of things you touched on there, John. I think the Greens are probably something they should keep an eye on. In terms of the independent sort of pro-Gaza MPs that have come in, they'll be shouty. But come the next election, I would be very, very surprised if that is still a major issue.
Yeah.
So then it becomes
hopefully it is.
But how do they build up a personal brand profile that will last them longer than that? And also, you had guys like Shaukat Adam who, when he gave he said this is for Gaza. I think there will be a wider pushback on that from the electorate who will say, look, I want to sort out problems with what's going on with inflation, with the cost of living crisis, with the health service. Yes, that's something that is absolutely important, and there's horrible things that are going on there. But I just think come next election, that's, as you say, hopefully it would not be an issue, but I just don't see it being an issue. So I think they can kind of view that as we don't need to pay too much attention to it. And you said about Jeremy Corbyn's surprising result. I've been to North Islington. That didn't surprise me, to be honest with you. So I kind of thought he was going to keep it, if I'm honest with you.
All right. Well, actually, and I suppose the thing we touched on very briefly at the top is actually what Labour do with reform. And actually, this is where I think reform will have the bigger impact. And I know Greens will say, "Oh, they only got one more seat than us. Why are they getting so much attention?" But Reform's positioning now, millions and millions of votes, really strong second places in lots of Labour. That impact Reform is going to have on Labour, because we know what it is. There's socially conservative working class areas that have voted Reform this time. Some of it as a protest, some of it because they didn't like Keir Starmer, some of it because they just didn't like the two main parties. But Labour are gonna have to figure out what to do about that. And do you think they will, Martin, or because one of the things, so let's just take my seat, Ribble Valley. Okay, so Labour won that by 800 votes, a seat that was a non-target seat. They only picked the candidate 2 days before the election was called. Didn't do until Farage turned up. They did very little work in that constituency, but won it by 800 votes. And like I say, Reform got 8,000 votes in the end. So how do Labour hold on to Ribble Valley or seats like that going forward without appealing to that Reform vote? Because there aren't enough Lib Dem, Labour, Greens, everyone else to offset that. They know there's a whole chunk of moderate Tories that will never vote Labour. So how would Labour keep that seat without tacking to the right and appealing to Reform voters?
Well, look, I think, sorry if you're coming to me, John. And then I'll
you go first, then Martin
can come in. Because I don't know the answer, so you go for it.
Look, I think, the honest answer is I think, there are people who voted Reform because either they're not very happy with the system as it is. And in some cases, it was a protest vote. I don't think we can shy away from the fact that there are some people that do have, and I'm going to use the nice phrase, concerns about immigration, that will want to see that addressed, right? So Labour have now talked up about they're going to get somebody to head up this new border force. They're talking about having anti-terrorism legislation to allow them to deal with these criminal gangs. I think those voters will want to see how they're really targeting that before they make their mind up. But I think also, look, ultimately it comes down to a couple of things. If you can make serious improvements quickly on people's lives, and I'm not talking like all of a sudden everybody's living in a mansion, but you can get people to the fact that they can afford decent food, a decent level of living. They can see improvements in their community. They can see a distribution of wealth, and the level of inequality that comes from the south upwards comes down somewhat. That's why they're talking about this committee of nations and regions to try and make a more concerted inroad into how do we tackle that level of inequality. If you can make serious inroads and point to what you've done in those areas, I can see perhaps some of that Reform vote maybe either just going away or potentially coming back to Labour. But the reality is that a lot of people voted Reform because they're just really not happy with how things have been going. And it was a protest. It was as much as maybe Brexit was a protest, that was a protest.
I mean, there are some amazing things that are happening there. In my constituency, we actually had one of the Reform candidates who was disowned by Reform early on because they found some racist stuff on his profile, alleged racist stuff on his profile, whatever you want to call it. He was disowned early on Channel 4. He got 6,000 votes without actually doing any campaigning, but purely by being there. So there are a lot of people who want to vote for it. I think. We should just point out there, Martin. We have to remember that we are, and then probably anyone that listens to this podcast are weird in terms of that we think about politics a lot. And actually, how many of those people who voted, the 6,000 people that voted for him or her, I don't remember, but actually even paid attention to any of that or cut through at all? Even beforehand, people were saying, "Oh, it's a shame." If you want to see it when you're campaigning mode, it's a shame he got disowned because we thought he might take some votes off the Conservative. I never doubted the fact that it wasn't. Most people were not going to notice, and they weren't going in to vote for a candidate. They were going to vote. I'm voting for Nigel, basically. Reform. We had quite a lot of people who I saw some of the ballots. They literally actually crossed out the candidate's name and wrote Nigel Farage and voted for that.
Really?
So there was some of that going on, but yeah, I think part of how they solve the problem, if they can get going for it, and we've seen some of this already. I think if you go for the cause, not the symptom, in terms of, some people don't like immigration because they don't like immigration, but some of the vote is coming for, we've got all this immigration, but where is all the, the public services to support it? Now, there's an argument that actually, if you can make those improvements to public services and you can provide some of that infrastructure so that people see, their lives do get better and they don't feel like things are happening to them that they can blame on immigration, then maybe some of it will go away. And I think that's part of why they're sort of majoring on planning reform. Now, planning reform when it comes to housing is a tricky area sometimes, but in the big infrastructure projects and things like that, they're saying we can't have it take so many years to deliver these things. So if they can actually start delivering some of that stuff early on, that could well make a difference for them.
Yeah. So that's a brilliant overview. Thank you, David. Thank you, Martin. I suppose we should end on a kind of a positive note to just how well the Lib Dems actually did in terms of actually message discipline, the use of the stunts coupled with good policy. I mean, literally, we had an episode with Mark Pack maybe a week out and also 2 weeks out saying we were waiting for the wheels to come off and I had all sorts of anxieties, whether, because whether Ed Davey and the post office scandal because of the right-wing hatchet job that I was trying to do, would that be the only thing the members of the public knew about it? But combination of our manifesto was really well received, really, really well researched. We were disciplined, and I think that is a really important thing we don't talk enough about in politics. Actually, places that had county elections, they stayed to, there's no point in putting a leaflet out to the entire constituency. You keep to the areas where you need to work. If you're not there, get to your target seats. It all seemed to work really well. And yes, 72 seats was far beyond our probably wildest dreams for this election, but we gave ourselves the platform to do that. We gave ourselves a chance to do that. And sometimes in politics, that's all you can do is actually give yourself as good a chance, and hopefully the winds of change blow in your favour. And I suppose, David, your final words, David, and Martin can have the last word, but your final words, David, on reflecting on the Lib Dem campaign.
Look, I think fundamentally it couldn't have probably gone better. There's not a single result that I look to and gone, oh God, we could have done better there. Everything has been stellar. I think you have to give a serious round of applause to the campaign management team, the activists who went out on the doors and delivered that result. I think people always forget that, yes, the candidates themselves do a brilliant job, but there is a lot of people in the background that help deliver those results, and we have to give thanks to people like Martin, people like you, John, that obviously help deliver those fantastic results on the night. Look, I don't think there's anything else that can be said other than this is fantastic, but now the challenge becomes is how do we not only hold those 72 seats, but how do we make gains again come next time? And I think there's real opportunities on the table. There's a lot of things to be played out over the next 5 years, but I have a lot of positive views on where we go from here.
Yeah, and for complete election dorks like me and Martin, I've already got in my head. Yes, we have county elections next year, but it's possible we might have county elections at the same time as a general in 5 years' time. So Lib Dems having ourselves in a decent place. But Martin, your final thoughts is now in one of our areas which has been a huge success, and much praise must go to you and your team. But what are your lasting memories?
Lasting, just seeing a lot of the results, doing the tallying on the night and seeing it grow, and it was, I don't know, it was a bit like watching England really, in terms of like, oh, it's going really well, but can it really happen? Yeah, I know.
David's not sharing that analogy with you.
I know. Well, yeah, fair enough. But we did get there. But I agree with everything that both of you said about the how brilliant it was for the Lib Dems and the summing up of it. But I also just wanted to say I think this is a massive personal triumph for Ed Davey as well, actually, because if we think about his time in this, in that role, you know, he took it. He stood for the leadership, having been defeated the year before, and you know, he summoned up, you know, said, no, I really still want to go ahead and do this in some pretty depressing circumstances for the party at the time, and questions around whether we needed to show a break from the coalition past and all of that with a change. But no, he said, no, I'm gonna go for this and I'm gonna do it. You know, COVID at the time as well, trying to actually make the impression. People talk about that with Keir Starmer, but it was the same for Ed as well, trying to make that impression and build it up little by little. And I think, you know, the way this campaign has been fought, massively targeting, I think, you know, this was very different to how previous general elections have been fought. And I don't know whether that was something he himself initially pushed or whether it was something that was put forward and he drove it through. But, you know, we've had all those years of being on 8, 9, 10% or something. But he's had the personal, you know, conviction to say, no, this is the right thing. We're going for it and we're going to do it. And what a vindication for him personally to deliver the largest Liberal grouping in Parliament in 100 years. So, you know, congratulations and well done, Ed, from me.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Brilliant. So thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, man. I should also point out to all our listeners and viewers that obviously having 4 of our main panelists being elected, which is great, but obviously they're going to be very busy, we imagine, you know, running their constituencies, doing great things as MPs. You've seen it already. A lot of our MPs have already written to Secretary of State talking about the hospital in Stockport and whatever else. But we have recruited 4 new brilliant people onto our roster. So keep tuned for that. We'll have some wonderful guests. We'll have loads to talk about because whatever else is going to happen in this Parliament, it's going to be really interesting, and we're going to be with you every step of the way, giving you campaign advice, the latest news, everything you expect from the Lib Dem podcast. But go out, enjoy it. If you can, try and have a break. I certainly know I need one because I'm pretty shattered, but it's been great fun and we should really celebrate how massive this has been, and thank you to each and every one of you that helped make this happen. So on behalf of me, Martin and David, thank you very much, and we'll have another episode very soon.